Picture this, a grand military parade in Tianjin, China, filled with the thunder of tanks, the roar of fighter jets, and the synchronized march of thousands of soldiers. But the real spectacle was not on the ground or in the skies, it was on the stage. Standing shoulder to shoulder were three of the most powerful and controversial leaders of our time: Xi Jinping of China, Vladimir Putin of Russia, and Kim Jong Un of North Korea. This image alone sent shockwaves across the globe. It wasn't just a military parade. It was a declaration, a message, a carefully orchestrated moment meant to rattle the world order. Why did this matter so much? Because these three leaders represent not only military might, but also ideological defiance. Together, they symbolize resistance to Western dominance, particularly the United States and its allies. For decades, the international system has been led primarily by the West through NATO, the EU, and partnerships with countries across Asia and Africa. But on September 3, 2025, in Tianjin, the world witnessed a chilling reminder: a new bloc of power may be forming. Think about it, China, the economic superpower that's now rapidly modernizing its military. Russia, still locked in a grinding war with Ukraine, yet unwilling to bow under Western sanctions. North Korea, long isolated, suddenly standing in the spotlight as a partner in this show of strength. It was as if history was repeating itself. The Cold War never truly ended, just shifted. And now, with this symbolic gathering, we may be witnessing the dawn of Cold War 2.0. But let's dig deeper. Why was this moment so significant? First, because optics matter in geopolitics. Images travel faster than policies, and a single photograph can send louder signals than any official statement. When Xi, Putin, and Kim appeared together, they were essentially saying, "We are united, we are strong, and we are not afraid of Western pressure." Second, because each leader had something to gain from this moment. Xi Jinping wanted to project China as the central force of a new world order. Vladimir Putin wanted to show the world that he is not isolated despite the Ukraine war. Kim Jong Un wanted legitimacy, recognition, and leverage against both South Korea and the United States. And third, because the timing could not have been more calculated. The West is facing internal divisions, from US politics to European fatigue over the prolonged Ukraine war. Meanwhile, Asia is becoming the epicenter of global power struggles. By appearing together now, Xi, Putin, and Kim were making a bold statement. The balance of power is shifting eastward. For ordinary people around the world, the parade may have looked like just another display of military might. But for diplomats, analysts, and policymakers, it was a loud alarm bell. A reminder that alliances are shifting and that the global order we've known for decades may be crumbling. The symbolism cannot be overstated. Three leaders, often painted as villains in Western media, standing united in defiance of the international system. It was both a warning and a promise. A warning to their rivals, and a promise to their allies that they would stand together in the storms to come. The key question now is, was this just theater, or the beginning of something much bigger? The world has seen alliances rise and fall before, but this particular display China's parade, Russia's resilience, and North Korea's sudden visibilities suggests more than symbolism. It hints at strategy, coordination, and perhaps even the foundations of a new power bloc that could reshape the future. In short, September 3rd wasn't just a date in the calendar. It was a turning point in global politics. And the Tianjin parade may one day be remembered as the day when Cold War 2.0 was officially set in motion. Asterisk, when the world saw the Tianjin parade, many headlines described it as China flexing its military muscles, another show of tanks, missiles, and troops marching in perfect formation. But for President Xi Jinping, it was about far more than military pageantry. This was about redefining China's place in the global order and sending a message to the world that could not be ignored for decades. China carried the image of being the world's factory, a country known mainly for producing electronics, steel, clothing, and everything in between. Its role was economic, the manufacturing hub of globalization. But Xi Jinping has worked relentlessly to shift that narrative. Today, Beijing wants recognition not just as an economic powerhouse, but as a strategic superpower. The Tianjin parade was Xi's way of saying, "We are no longer a silent giant. We are ready to lead." The global timing is everything. Right now, the United States is heavily invested in strengthening its presence in the Indo-Pacific. Washington's alliances with Japan, South Korea, and Australia are aimed squarely at countering Beijing's rise. Meanwhile, tensions over Taiwan and the South China Sea remain flashpoints, where even a small misstep could spark a major conflict. Against this backdrop, Xi's decision to stand side by side with Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong Un was highly symbolic. It told the world that China is not isolated. It will not face pressure alone. Any attempt to corner Beijing will be met with collective strength. Military modernization on display, hardware on parade was not for show alone. China's military modernization over the past 2 decades has been staggering. Hypersonic missiles capable of evading US defenses, expanding naval fleets with aircraft carriers that can project power deep into the Pacific, cyber warfare units, and artificial intelligence programs designed for the next generation of conflict. Even outer space is now part of China's strategy. By showcasing these advancements, Xi was sending a twofold message. To his people, your country is strong, prepared, and capable of defending its interests at any cost. To the world, do not underestimate us. We are ready not just to compete economically, but militarily and strategically. And the stage was not his alone. By bringing Putin and Kim into the picture, Xi reinforced the idea that China is the centerpiece of a new axis of power. Partnerships reinforced Xi's presence alongside Putin, highlighted a partnership that has deepened dramatically since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Western sanctions cut Moscow off from global markets, forcing Russia to lean heavily on Beijing for trade, technology, and financial support. For Putin, China has become a lifeline. For Xi, this is leverage, a chance to shape the global balance by becoming indispensable to Russia's survival. With Kim Jong Un, the dynamic is different but no less strategic. For decades, North Korea has relied on China as its only major ally, surviving largely because Beijing kept the door to trade and aid slightly open. By bringing Kim onto the global stage, Xi elevated Pyongyang's role. The message was simple: even small, isolated nations will not be abandoned if they stand with us. This move serves 2 key purposes for Beijing. First, it secures China's regional influence by keeping Pyongyang firmly within its orbit. Second, it positions China as a protector of alternative voices in global politics, a counterweight to Western dominance. A multipolar vision. Xi's strategic message ties directly into his broader vision of a multipolar world. In his view, the era of unipolar dominance where the United States dictated the rules is ending. Instead, he envisions a world with multiple power centers, where China takes a central role. Through projects like the Belt and Road Initiative, Beijing has already extended its economic reach into Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. The Tianjin parade was another brick in that wall, a visible demonstration that China is not just building ports and railways. It is building alliances of strength. Domestic resonance this moment also resonated powerfully at home. For years, the Chinese people have been told their nation is rising after what she calls the century of humiliation, a period when foreign powers dominated and humiliated China. Seeing their leader proudly standing with Putin and Kim sends a powerful nationalist signal. China is back. China is leading. China will never be humiliated again. For Xi, this kind of symbolism is political gold. It cements his authority at home and reinforces the idea that his vision of strength, pride, and global leadership is working. Risks of boldness, of course. Bold moves carry risks. Aligning so openly with Russia and North Korea could complicate China's relations with other partners, especially in Europe or among Asian middle powers that Beijing has carefully courted. Countries like Germany, India, or Indonesia may view this axis with unease, but Xi seems willing to take that gamble. His calculation is simple. The benefits of projecting unity and strength outweigh the potential diplomatic costs. The message ultimately, Xi's strategic message was clear. China will not bow to pressure. China will not stand alone. And China is ready to shape the next chapter of world history. The Tianjin parade was not just about military firepower. It was a declaration of intent. A declaration that the world must now accept China not only as a trading giant, but as a political and military force prepared to lead in a new era of global competition. For Vladimir Putin, standing shoulder to shoulder with Xi Jinping and Kim Jong Un in Tianjin was not just about friendship or ceremony or some casual show of solidarity. No, this moment was about something far deeper: survival and legitimacy. Let's be clear, Russia is not in a comfortable position. The war in Ukraine has dragged into its fourth year. Sanctions from the United States and Europe have cut Moscow off from global markets, technology, and capital. Billions of dollars in assets have been frozen. Russian oligarchs have lost yachts, mansions, and access to Western luxuries. The ruble has stumbled, and ordinary Russians have felt the weight of economic isolation. And yet, there stood Putin in Chinese soil, not hiding in the shadows, but standing tall with two of the most defiant figures on the global stage. This was his chance to rewrite the story the West has been telling about him. In Washington, Brussels, and London, Putin is often painted as a man cornered, weakened, desperate to cling to power. But the optics of Tianjin told a different story. Here was a leader who still had powerful friends, who still commanded respect, and who was willing to publicly align himself with partners unafraid of Western disapproval. For his domestic audience, this mattered immensely. Russian citizens back home, watching state media broadcasts of the parade, didn't just see their president isolated. They saw him included, welcomed as part of a rising coalition. That single image sent a wave of reassurance across Russia. We are not alone. We are not a pariah state. We are still relevant, still powerful, still respected. The truth is, Russia's relationship with China has become the lifeline of Putin's strategy. Since 2022, when sanctions from the West began to bite, Beijing has stepped in to fill the void. China buys Russian oil and gas at discounted rates, providing Moscow with much-needed revenue. It supplies consumer goods, electronics, and industrial equipment that Russia can no longer get from Europe. In some cases, Chinese companies even provide technological support for Russia's military industry. In return, Russia offers something just as valuable: cheap energy to fuel China's massive economy, raw materials for its industries, and a political partner willing to challenge American influence. It's a relationship that has gone beyond economics. It's now a strategic alliance. And by standing beside Xi in Tianjin, Putin underlined that point. This partnership isn't temporary. It's not just transactional. It's political. It's long-term. But the gamble doesn't stop with China. By aligning himself with Kim Jong Un, Putin sent a provocative signal to the West. Your outcasts are our allies. For decades, North Korea has been treated as a rogue state, isolated under sanctions and mocked in Western media. By openly embracing Kim on the global stage, Putin flipped that script. He elevated North Korea from an isolated dictatorship to a player within a broader bloc. This move gives Russia new leverage. Imagine future negotiations with Washington or Brussels. Instead of dealing with Russia alone, Western diplomats now have to consider a trio: Moscow, Beijing, and Pyongyang. That changes the calculation. It makes Russia look less like a desperate aggressor and more like a central figure in an emerging power axis. The optics are undeniable. On one side of the world, NATO continues to pour billions into Ukraine to resist Russian advances. On the other side, Putin is smiling, shaking hands, and waving next to two leaders who also defy Western power. For his supporters, it's a powerful comeback moment. For his enemies, it's a frustrating reminder. This man isn't going away. But here's where the gamble becomes dangerous. Russia is putting almost all of its weight behind this new eastward alliance. In doing so, it risks alienating countries that could have acted as mediators. Nations like India, which have carefully tried to balance ties with both Russia and the West, may start feeling uneasy. If Russia leans too heavily on China and North Korea, it could lose flexibility and reduce its options. There's another risk too: dependency. Right now, Moscow needs Beijing more than Beijing needs Moscow. Over time, this imbalance could grow. Russia could slowly become the junior partner in the relationship, relying on China for markets, technology, and political cover. For a proud nation like Russia and for a leader like Putin, that would be a bitter pill to swallow. Still, in the short term, the gamble is working. The Tianjin parade boosted Putin's image, reassured his people, and rattled his adversaries. It reminded the world that despite sanctions, despite the war, despite Western attempts to isolate him, Putin still has a seat at the table, perhaps not at the Western table, but at one where he feels just as powerful. The key takeaway for Russia is simple: Moscow is not defeated. Its alliances are stronger than the West wants to admit. And as Putin left that parade, flanked by Xi on one side and Kim on the other, he sent a message loud and clear: Russia is not backing down, it's doubling down. But this raises the next question. If Russia is gambling on alliances to survive, what about Kim Jong Un? Why was North Korea's leader suddenly in the spotlight? And what does this mean for the balance of power in Asia? Among the three leaders standing together in Tianjin, the one that shocked the world the most was Kim Jong Un. Think about it. For years, North Korea has been described in Western headlines with the same familiar words: isolated, secretive, impoverished. Its leader, Kim, has often been dismissed as nothing more than a ruthless dictator clinging to power in a failing state. He's been mocked for his appearance, ridiculed for his regime's propaganda, and treated as a man ruling a country that the world could afford to ignore. But then came September 3rd. There he was, Kim Jong Un standing proudly beside Xi Jinping, and Vladimir Putin smiling and waving as cameras flashed and crowds cheered. This wasn't just a photo op, this was history. For the first time in decades, Kim wasn't the awkward outsider. He was part of a powerful trio being presented on the world stage. And for North Korea, that changes everything. For decades, Pyongyang's only real lifeline to the outside world has been China. Occasionally, there have been flickers of contact with Russia, and a handful of high-stakes meetings with the US like Kim's, dramatic summits with Donald Trump in 2018 and 2019. But those moments faded quickly. The narrative returned to the same, a small, isolated country, punished by sanctions, surviving on scraps of trade with Beijing. This time, though, Kim wasn't just a guest at someone else's table. He was part of the table. For him, the benefits are enormous. Domestically, the images of him walking alongside two of the most powerful men in the world are priceless. In North Korea, propaganda is everything. Every speech, every news broadcast, every newspaper headline is carefully curated to shape how the people see their leader. And now, Kim can show his citizens proof that he's not isolated at all. He can say, "Look, the leaders of China and Russia respect me. They stand with me. Our country is not small and forgotten. We are part of a great alliance." This instantly boosts his legitimacy at home. It feeds national pride and gives his grip on power a fresh layer of validation. But beyond domestic politics, Kim also gains something else: leverage. For decades, his strategy has been to use North Korea's nuclear weapons program as a bargaining chip with the outside world. Every missile test, every underground nuclear blast, every fiery speech, these have been designed to remind the world that Pyongyang cannot be ignored. Usually, the US and its allies respond with sanctions, condemnation, and warnings. But Kim has often found himself negotiating from a position of weakness. Now, with China and Russia openly standing by his side, his bargaining position looks a lot stronger. He can walk into future talks with Washington or Seoul knowing he has to heavyweight backers who can complicate any effort to isolate him further. There's also the military dimension. North Korea has been steadily advancing its missile technology testing. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, experimenting with submarine-launched missiles, and perfecting nuclear warheads. Normally, these actions trigger international outrage and calls for tighter sanctions. But imagine this scenario. Every time the US pushes for new penalties, China and Russia block the effort in the United Nations Security Council. Suddenly, North Korea has cover. It has space to continue developing its arsenal without fear of total isolation. That's why this parade in Tianjin was such a monumental moment. For Kim, it was nothing short of a comeback. Instead of being cornered, he now appears as a rising player in a broader power alliance. Instead of looking like a dictator on the margins, he looks like a partner with two global giants. And that perception, whether or not it reflects reality, matters enormously in international politics. Of course, for the West, this is deeply concerning. A united China-Russia-North Korea bloc doesn't just complicate the balance of power in Asia, it creates ripple effects across the globe. Think about US allies like South Korea and Japan. They now face the possibility of a more confident, more emboldened Pyongyang, shielded by Beijing and Moscow. Think about Europe, already dealing with the fallout of Russia's war in Ukraine. Now watching Moscow strengthen ties with another nuclear-armed state. And for Washington, This raises a troubling question. How do you negotiate with North Korea when it no longer fears isolation? For Kim personally, though this moment was the realization of a long-standing dream, for years he has wanted to be seen not as a pariah, but as a player, someone whose support and cooperation actually matter when shaping global politics. September 3rd, standing on that stage in Tianjin, he finally got to play that role. It was his chance to step out of the shadows, his chance to show the world and his people that North Korea isn't a forgotten footnote in history. It's part of a new story, a new alliance, a new era. But this comeback also brings new risks. The stronger Kim appears, the more dangerous his moves may become. And that means the global community must ask, what happens when an emboldened North Korea pushes the limits further than ever before? That question leads us directly into the next part of this unfolding story. The West's alarm and the challenges, now facing Washington, Brussels, Seoul, and Tokyo. Asterisk, the Tianjin parade wasn't just about three leaders standing on a stage. It wasn't just about Kim Jong Un smiling, Vladimir Putin waving, or Xi Jinping observing the military spectacle. It was about the future of the world order, for the United States and NATO. The images from September 3rd were deeply unsettling. Washington has spent years trying to isolate Russia, pressure China, and keep North Korea boxed in. Yet the parade told a different story. Russia, far from being crippled by sanctions, stood proudly in front of cameras. China, far from backing down under US competition, welcomed both Moscow and Pyongyang into its orbit. And North Korea, once dismissed as a rogue pariah, was suddenly positioned as part of a powerful bloc. The message was clear: efforts to divide and isolate these nations have not worked. Instead, those efforts may have pushed them closer together. A world divided into blocs, the global implications are massive. If this trio, China, Russia, and North Korea, solidifies its relationship into a formal or even semi-formal alliance, the world could soon resemble a stage we've seen before, a world divided into two competing blocs. On one side, you have the Western Bloc led by the United States, NATO, and allies like Japan, South Korea, Australia, and the European Union. This group continues to emphasize democracy, free markets, and collective security agreements. On the other side, you have the Eastern Bloc led by China and Russia, with North Korea and potentially Iran playing supporting roles. This group emphasizes sovereignty, resistance to Western interference, and alternative economic networks. The danger of this division is obvious. It risks escalating existing conflicts. In Eastern Europe, the war in Ukraine could grow even more dangerous as Russia feels emboldened by open Chinese support. On the Korean Peninsula, Pyongyang might take greater risks, knowing it has cover from Moscow and Beijing. In the South China Sea, China may act more aggressively toward Taiwan and US naval presence. The term Cold War 2.0 doesn't sound like exaggeration anymore. It feels like a looming reality. The arms race question: a divided world also means one other thing: a potential arms race. If each bloc begins to compete not only for economic dominance, but also military superiority, we could see new waves of defense spending, weapons testing, and nuclear brinkmanship. The original Cold War lasted for decades, shaping every aspect of global politics. A second one between nuclear-armed powers with advanced technology could be even more dangerous. The dilemma for developing nations. This shift poses both opportunities and dangers. On one hand, countries in Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia may suddenly find themselves courted by both sides. Investments, aid packages, military deals, and diplomatic favors could all increase as Washington and Beijing compete for influence. But this leverage comes with pressure. Many nations may be forced to choose a line with the Western bloc or a line with the Eastern one. Staying neutral could become harder as the rivalry intensifies. The Pakistan angle that brings us to Pakistan, a country that sits at the intersection of these shifting dynamics. For years, Pakistan has maintained a deep strategic partnership with China, anchored by the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor (CPEC), a flagship project of Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative. Billions of dollars have flowed into infrastructure, energy, and transport corridors. This relationship is so central that in Pakistan's political and military circles, China is often referred to as the nation's all-weather friend. At the same time, relations with Russia have quietly improved. In recent years, Pakistan has purchased energy supplies from Moscow at discounted rates, engaged in joint military drills, and explored deeper defense cooperation. While not allies in the traditional sense, Islamabad and Moscow are far closer now than they were during the Cold War. Even with North Korea, Pakistan has historical ties. In the past, both nations exchanged technical and scientific expertise, particularly in defense. While these links have faded, the historical memory remains. If this new Eastern Bloc continues to strengthen, Pakistan may find itself naturally aligned with it, both because of geography and because of long-standing ties that could bring clear benefits: more Chinese investment, more Russian energy deals, and stronger diplomatic backing in forums like the United Nations. But the risks are just as serious. Pakistan still depends heavily on Western markets for exports, and it relies on international financial institutions, often dominated by the US and its allies, for loans and economic support. Alienating the West too much could bring economic pain. Balancing between the two blocs may become one of Pakistan's greatest foreign policy challenges in the coming decade. A new multipolar order for the world at large. The parade in Tianjin wasn't just an event. It was a message that the unipolar era dominated by the United States, the era that began after the Cold War ended in 1991, is fading. A new multipolar order is emerging, one where power is distributed among several centers rather than concentrated in one. The big question is, will this new order lead to cooperation or confrontation? Will these blocs find ways to coexist, or will their rivalry plunge the world into deeper instability? What is clear is that September 3rd will not be forgotten. The Tianjin parade will be remembered as more than just a display of military might. It will be seen as a turning point, a moment when three leaders stood together and declared that the rules of the game are changing. And as the world watches, one thing is certain: the choices made in the next few years will determine whether this new era is marked by peace or by conflict.